and I'll try and answer them in time. But thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to Kate for a really great first talk in this session. So my name is Rachael Ainsworth. I am the Research Software Community Manager at the Software Sustainability Institute, and today I'm going to talk to you about our experiences and lessons learned. But what is the Software Sustainability Institute? We are a national facility in the UK promoting the advancement of software in research, and we've been going since 2010. And we do this by cultivating better, more sustainable research software to enable world-class research. And so our motto is better software, better research. We are a collaboration between the universities of Edinburgh, Manchester, Oxford, and Southampton. And we are comprised of software, training, policy, community, and outreach teams. So I'm part of the community team, so I manage the Institute's fellowship program and organize its annual collaborations workshop, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. And we are funded by all 7 UK research councils. So earlier this year, we had our collaborations workshop, our 2020 edition, and collaborations workshop is the annual unconference that the Software Sustainability Institute organizes, which brings together pretty much all stakeholders related to research software. So researchers, developers, innovators, managers, funders, publishers, and so on. And we explore best practices and the future of research software. And it's an unconference, so in addition to keynote presentations, mini workshops, and demo sessions, lightning talks, we also have more collaborative interactive sessions such as discussion groups, collaborative idea generation, and we end the conference with a full-on hack day where we actually do or make some of the ideas that come out of the collaborative group sessions. So this year it was due to take place at the end of March in Belfast, Northern Ireland. But as with everything, COVID hit, and we pretty much had to decide 3 weeks, 3 weeks until we were supposed to meet in person about whether or not we wanted to move it online. And this was before we had any official guidance from the government. So we kind of took the plunge, and it was a good thing we did because it would have had to have been canceled in person anyways. And our themes this year were open research, data privacy, and software sustainability. But SSI has lots of experience working with online events. So I'll be talking about my experience organizing a collaborations workshop, but we also have a lot of different online training that we do. We're plugged into the carpentries. So we've done a lot of carpentry style workshops, we've done instructor training. And so we've developed some guidance for running online training, which I've linked here, and that's sort of the basis for this talk. So all of what I'm going to tell you now was compiled by all of these amazing people at SSI with these varied experiences. So I came in a bit late to the last session, so hopefully I don't reiterate too much of what you've already discussed, but platforms need to be assessed based on your communities. So we use Zoom because that's what we have access to, but I really like Zoom meetings because it feels closer to an in-person conference than just a webinar, and it empowers participants to engage. Crucially, the breakout rooms facilitate interaction between participants through things like icebreakers, group discussions, and a lot of those unconference style events that we do. And it's usually reported back to us that it's the participants' favorite part of an online event where they get to chat to each other in smaller groups. Alternatives could be Blackboard, Collaborate with breakout rooms. We also have a collaborative note-taking document, such as through Google Docs, which we use for agendas, roll calls, taking notes, and basically keeping everybody synchronized. And that's where we can, ask questions and keep all of the answers and notes. And it has zero barrier to entry because it doesn't actually require an account or any special knowledge of syntax. The one barrier we did hit with Google Docs is that the maximum number of people that can edit and comment at any time is 100 people. And some alternatives to Google Docs could be Etherpad, which is what the carpentries use, or HackMD, which is written in Markdown. If you have larger events, it might be helpful to have another communication channel that persists outside of the Zoom meeting, and this is so that people can refer back to discussions, share resources, and facilitate community engagement. It's also really, really useful for conference organizers. So we use practical channels such as private back channels for organizers and the code of conduct committee, and we also had a help desk channel where we directed participants to. And we can also create fun channels to add a more human element to the event, such as like pets at the conference. But using all of these different platforms can cause a real problem as far as screen real estate goes. And Kate mentioned this with, trying to watch what the presenter is doing while also, writing in a terminal or a Jupyter notebook in your own screen. So we always advise participants on the best setup to help them really get the most out of the event, recommend a good headset, additional monitor, etc. Some other considerations for online events is the agenda. So you really need to sort of bash it out a bit, a lot differently to an in-person event. So I think it was mentioned that towards the ends of the last session, long days, people get really tired, Zoom fatigue's a real thing, and we're all on conference calls a lot more lately. So it's better to have, in general, shorter blocks and longer or more regular breaks, so that the event is less tiring for participants. It's also important to set break times and keep to them, because this allows people to make arrangements around the event, especially in the time of COVID when people are also juggling caring responsibilities and other things. Things will take longer, so factor in extra time to complete tasks, go through training material and solve technical problems. Creating and managing breakout rooms adds extra time, so factor that into the agenda. Have learners at a similar skill level at the workshop to help get the pace right, because if you have somebody who's maybe at a more novice level than your other participants, then they might hold up your training with a lot of questions. So we like to use a pre-workshop survey to gather learners' backgrounds, and be very intentional with your code of conduct and adapt it to the online event to include any extra communication channels that you add to your event. Roles and responsibilities. So we usually have a designated event facilitator role in our events, because it can be very tiring and time consuming for the active instructor to monitor the chat, monitor the nonverbal feedback, and the collaborative notes documents while they're presenting. So the event facilitator can manage the participants, mute people who have, their microphones still on, bring attention to issues, and this really frees up the instructor to instruct and the helpers to help. Kate's already talked about getting the instructor and helper to learner ratio right, and she's already mentioned it for the carpentries. We find that the ratio of one instructor or helper to 4 or 5 learners works really well for our online training. For our events, we tend to have a pre-event rehearsal for the delivery team to make sure everyone has the correct setup or settings enabled, especially when we were first getting started with Zoom. It really helped to get all of the co-hosts and co-facilitators on the same page and practice with the platforms and understand what their role would be on the day. It can also be useful for participants or trainees to have a pre-event meeting or office hours, which can provide an opportunity to test their tech, troubleshoot any installation issues, and ask any questions. Security, permissions, and data privacy are also something that I find to be really important for these online events. So you can mitigate the security risks, for example, those Zoom bombers or people who come to sabotage events, which I've never experienced, but I heard about it sort of at the start of lockdown. But you can require registration, enable a meeting room password, and or use a waiting room, and make it very clear to participants what information should not be shared. For example, the link to the Zoom room. It's important to get permission from participants. So if you're going to have a collaborative notes document, it's important to tell them what you are going to share publicly or not, or if you're going to record the event so that they know whether or not they want to have their cameras on or off. And you can do all this by providing a privacy policy at registration. I find with this, it's also really good to give permission to participants. So really empower participants to, for example, edit the collaborative notes document. So in the carpentries, this could be the Etherpad for the training, raise issues, and directly interrupt so that problems don't linger too long. For multi-day events, it can be really useful to capture what learners feel is working well and what needs improving as feedback in the shared document at the end of the day, and so that instructors can adapt for the next day. And so I'm just going to finish up now. Everything I've talked about is published in this guidance for running online training that the SSI published just last week, I think. We've also shared all of our documentation with our infrastructure resources that we use to run a collaborations workshop online. So that includes all of the different roles and our duties roster, as well as our collaborative notes document and just everything related to collaborations workshop. We have blog posts about how we pulled it together in 3 weeks, as well as the session recordings. And just to finish up, there's a virtual event guide coming out soon by the CSCCE, and then CarpentryCon at Home has a lot of sessions going on over the next few weeks about opportunities in transitioning meetings online. And so I will end there.
Thank you very much, Rachel, again for a really enlightening talk and some great tips. So I'm opening it to the floor for questions. To either raise your hand or wave at me. They have some lovely applause there. Or you can type a chat questions. So these are great suggestions. They could be applied to face-to-face as well, especially the parts about practicing, having observers and structuring days around breaks. Okay, does anybody want to raise their hand? I think the most challenging training is in this field of software and programming. But it looks like you guys are kind of overcoming this to some extent. I think it's going to be a learning curve for everybody for quite some time. Are there any waving hands or?
I had a question.
Raised? Yes, Patricia.
Because Kate was talking about having one helper or trainer for every 8 participants. And now Rachel said, propose 1 to 5. We have been experiencing also 1 to 5, especially for the course that vary for beginners also, like programming or Python, so on. So what do you feel it's better? Well, I guess, of course, the more the merrier, but we cannot all afford to have that many helpers for many people. So what's your feeling about this? And why in particular one number versus the other one, so 5 or 8?
I think it's based on, I think Kate touched upon this, in that it's just how maybe confident you are as an instructor, and if you can sort of juggle all of the different things going on. I think the reason we have such like a 1 to 4, 1 to 5 ratio for things like carpentry's training is just because if people have issues with installation or particular technical setup, they might need to, you know, go to a separate breakout room and try and troubleshoot that. So I guess it really just depends on what you're teaching and training on. And if, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.